Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This video is just going to be made up of short clips about things that I spot while I'm going round watering over the next couple of days. And the reason it's just triggered a new video is that following on from the one I've just posted, I've started watering and found some things. So let's have a look. What have we got? This little, I believe, Howiara, guilty, no tag, has got a spike. Now it's not going to be a good spike. I mean, it was a poor plant. I had to cut some back bulbs off. But the latest growth is having a go at putting a spike out. Now that comes into the category of, do I put the plant first or do I let it bloom? Decision not going to be made today. You have to bear in mind that plant got watered 8 days ago and it's not getting watered today, it's still wet. So that's probably going to go 16 days before that gets watered, because I'm certainly not going around looking at in between my sort of scheduled days watering the pots. I haven't got time. And I'd have to make a note of every single one that I missed out and go back and have a look at it. So this time of year I just leave them. If they totally dry out, so be it. Doesn't hurt them this time of year. But yeah, that's got a spike. I think I ought to take that spike off. Decision not today anyway. And this Dendrobium's being silly. This is the dehydrated Kiki that I got from Rachel along with the holy clay pots. So a while ago. And it's Spring Dreamer pollen, which in fact is the same as this one, obviously a bit behind, but it's pushing out some buds, so it's going to bloom. And given the number of buds it's got, the big fat cane there is this growing season's growth, so it's put on a nice new cane. It's got a single bud on it. I'll let that go, and that's an old cane. Letting that bloom does nothing for the plant. It just doesn't hurt it. You know, that cane's not going to grow anymore, and if it blooms, so be it. The strength of this plant is in this year's cane and the canes it will grow next year. So those old canes don't matter so much, so I'll let those blooms go. Yeah, there'll be a little bit of colour, well I was going to say colour, a little bit of mainly white in a different place because it's a different plant. But yeah, that's come on well since I got it. I'm pleased with the latest cane. It's nowhere near full size, but hopefully next year that will really take off. Okay, I'm coming to the end of watering pots today because it's starting to get later in the day and I've still got my mounted orchids to do and I want to leave time for those. So I'll continue watering tomorrow and spotting things as I go along. But had a discussion with my daughter talking about plants, and she said, God, that's got a lot of spikes on. I said, yeah, that's either the miniature Oncidium that was yours once and you know, when all your plants came down, or it's the yellow twinkle. And she said, well, there's no way that's my plant, because my plant was going downhill at the time quite badly, and therefore it's more likely to be the yellow twinkle. Well, that's good news. And she said, when you next time water, if you find a little Oncidium that you probably had to cut some of the older bulbs off that looks like it's not doing brilliantly, that's probably the miniature dancing lady. Well, that'll be it then. It's highly likely that'll be it. I mean, it does have a single new growth coming with roots. The older bulbs are a bit desiccated and that new growth's going to fail. So it's more likely that that is the miniature Oncidium dancing ladies, probably, and that the other one with all the spikes is the yellow twinkle. Well, I'm pleased about that, and given that that's got new roots with its new growth, the fact that the other new growth is failing, that was there when it was repotted, so it just didn't grow roots. That'll be the two, so that'll be a miniature dancing lady that may bloom on that new growth. As it's pushing it up this time of year, it's going to mature once the longer days come, so it may bloom, we shall see. But that's sorted those two out, 90% certain now, so that's good. And just while I've got that group on the table, a reminder, just because it's winter time, that does not mean there are no bugs. The cinnamon twinkle had mealybugs at the base of 2 of the older spikes, which I noticed as I trimmed them off. and this one, the yellow twinkle, had a few mealybugs at the base of one of the spikes. So just because it's winter doesn't mean there's no bugs. You still got to keep your eye out. But this time of year they can just get a spot treatment, you know, with a contact insecticide. It's also systemic as well, but you know, just the parts that had the bugs on can be sprayed. You don't need to give the whole plant a soaking, not this time of year. It's just, but be vigilant, just because it's winter and they're not breeding anywhere near as fast as they might do, because in 8 days mealybugs could get a real hold in the growing season. But this time of year they're just about hanging in there, so if you spot them, deal with them, and then you stop a potential outbreak as the warmer weather comes, you know, which can then be quite a problem. But this time of year, bit of spot treatment now and again, not a big deal. Again, on the vigilance side of life, this is on Castellicat, and basically the older part of the plant is destined to come off because it's in a pot that's too large for the active part of the plant. The active part of the plant really is the last new growth that bloomed and the latest new growth, and all the root growth is underneath that section. But hang on, see if I can bend over without knocking everything over with my rear end. We have that mould starting in the pot. Yeah? Reason? Stays wet too long. Hasn't got a big enough root system to dry that pot up fast enough. And that, combined with the algae, means it's coming out of that pot. But it can wait. I'm not doing that at this time of year. This growth's maturing. It's probably grown all the new roots it's going to grow, and it will mature and most likely bloom. Yeah, and it can do all of that where it is. The only care I've got to take is that, as you all know, I share water. Well, I stop sharing at that point. So if I was about to water that and I still had a fair bit of water left, I would put it to one side until I only had a little bit, and then use that last little bit on that pot, then sterilise the bowl, change the water. Precautions, that's all it is. Yeah, possibility of mould spores coming out of that pot and going into another pot are high. So at this point I stop sharing water. And any other things like that where I've got an iffy pot or an iffy plant, I literally put it to one side so that it can get the last dregs of the water, and then I can change. But yeah, that's a lovely new growth maturing there. We should get a spike on that later in the year, and they are big. Oh! I think the last spike I had on mine was over 3 foot long and had something like 50 blooms on it. They really do go, but it's a big plant, you know. So, but yeah, that is destined at an appropriate point to come out of that big pot. You can understand why it went in a big pot because of the size of the plant. But most of the older part of the plant didn't have any roots, you know, and it still won't have any. So when I get round to repotting that, I can probably just keep these 3 bulbs, yeah, the latest one. And again, I'll look at my notes and find out at which point the new growths push new roots out and time it accordingly. That may be halfway through next growing season, and it'll have to stay in there till then. So be it. But yeah, beautiful blooms, well worth it, but a big plant. It's one of my largest Oncidium types given the size of the bulbs and everything. But it doesn't want to go in a huge pot just because it's a big plant. The pot should accommodate the roots and leave enough room for one new growth. Well, the next new growth is going to be right on the edge of the pot, and all the rest of the pot is totally wasted. It's just sitting there staying wet because it hasn't got active root growth in it. So a readjustment of that plant and get it over to the other side of some new media, leaving room for the new growth when it decides to push one out, and it probably will be after it blooms. So yeah, that's another thing I'm about to do. I'm about to repot in my mind. I'm going to go through my notes, look at when things were last repotted, and change the colour of those that will need doing reasonably early in the year, so that they can then mature through the growing season, get their new roots into new media. Some of the Paphiopedilums will definitely be on that list. I like to repot those annually if I can, if I remember, but I don't like leaving them 2 years because they've got moss in small bark and stay wet quite a while. So that media will go off quicker than stuff that's in pure bark and doesn't get watered as often. It's just a logic, so I can go through my notes while we're in the quiet season and get ready for the repotting season. Another thing, if I'm going to repot a fair bit, which I don't know yet, but I can count up when I've done it, I need to think about supplies. You know, my Orchiata bark comes from Peter White. Well, I'm not having that posted. He needs to bring it to me at a show. And our first show is in February. So if I'm going to get more Orchiata bark in the large sacks, he needs to know about it in advance to make sure he puts some to one side, brings it to the show, straight in the boot of the car, no postage. Just pays, you know, to think ahead. It's no good getting to the end of that show into March, April time and thinking, ooh, I need some more Orchiata, because I won't see him again for a while. So, yeah, plan ahead. Think about your supplies. If you've got a fair bit of repotting to do come the growing season, well, you know, think about getting your supplies in. You never know. As far as I know, he's the only person who supplies Orchiata bark in this country. And he has said it might get more difficult to get. So, yeah, plan ahead. There are some bonuses when you don't look at your plants for a while, because you get surprises. You know, I've just got this Latorre. This is Polysema crossed with Aberrans, and I did say I was going to move this up onto the sort of display area because it's in bloom. This particular Latorre has got a smashing new growth pushing up here, and it has another 2 round here. 1, 2. So 3 new growths coming at once. It matured a couple of canes last year. But you have to bear in mind I haven't had Latorre types long. I got them all during last year, so I haven't even had them a year yet. So this is their first winter. They seem to be hanging in there. But this one's got another spike coming here and another spike there. And I do believe the top of that cane's going to move as well. But already I'm sort of seeing a pattern. If you see where the spikes are, they're on the smaller canes. Therefore, those are the older canes, because the newer canes that I've grown are quite tall. So this seems to need a year after the canes matured before the spikes push out. Now, that might not be wrong. It could just be the time of year. I've got to get used to these, and I haven't got a huge amount. I think I've got 4, maybe 5, something like that. But I've got enough now. I'm happy. I had none and got annoyed because I couldn't find any. And then they all came at once. But, I mean, these are very attractive blooms viewed from above. Viewed from underneath, not quite so attractive. Their pattern is on the back. So I think they'll get that one up on the display area because it's obviously got more to come now. So, yeah. I mean, that's one Latorre that seems to be doing okay. Yeah, pleased with that one. Now, this is my latest Dendrobium. Been after one of these for a while because I love the blooms and I like the way it actually blooms, because the blooms come out from the base of the plant in a cluster, so it's got an unusual blooming style. Careful how that comes out. But I do have a problem. I have a leaf that's decided to go over from the top down, and that is on one of the new, I wouldn't say that's the newest canes, because this is a new one, that's a new one, and so is this one pushing up here. So it's not, it's probably the previous year's cane. I'm not sure this one goes fully deciduous. It probably does in time, most of them do, but it's growing nicely. This is Dendrobium Hibiki, and it's a good plant. It's one of the best plants I've ever seen of this type. Most of the ones I've seen have got canes half that size, but I didn't get this for the canes, I got it for the blooms. It's in that peaty stuff, probably coconut fibre stuff, but it's got quite a lot of aerial roots, so if there is a bit of damage to some of the roots down in the pot, I'm not repotting this now at this time of year. I will wait till the spring and I can get it in some bark. It's a bit too big to mount. And I've never seen one of these mounted. I don't know whether it would do okay. The fact that it chucks out loads of aerial roots, it probably would do fine. But on the larger, heavier side, it would take some strapping on a mount. And it would take a while to get enough roots attached to a mount to actually be self-supporting. So it'll probably go in a pot when I get round to it. No signs of any blooms on this one yet, and again I haven't had it long enough to know the sort of time of year it blooms, but it looks good, it's growing well. Not sure about that. There's a couple of tinges on some of the other leaves. Now it could have been kept in poor light for quite a while, and then suddenly got out here with the bright light, and I didn't give it any sunglasses. So it could just be excess light. But I'm keeping my eye on it. And it's not a panic. When you see a problem with a single leaf, it's not a panic. Especially as it's a dry problem. There's no moisture involved. It's not like any form of wet mould or anything like that. So I'll live with that. And eventually that's going to die back to the cane, and then it can either be pulled off, trimmed off, or it'll fall off, one or the other. And just while I'm on that one, and the subject matter of what it's actually in, none of my potted plants have been watered now for 8/9 days. I did some watering yesterday, that was the 8th day. It's now the 9th day. That's still wet, and it's a dendrobium. I don't like that. I like them to dry off completely. Even the Latorres and the Phalaenopsis types, I still like them to dry out this time of year. And yesterday, out of the plants I watered, 6 were still wet. Far too wet to put any more water in. So they're now going to go about 15-16 days until they dry off. So it's the lower temperatures and the short days. They're not using the moisture as quick as they do in the longer days and the heat. So you've got to watch your watering. Things that are supposed to dry off, if they don't seem to be drying off as quickly as you'd like, then just don't put so much water in when you water them. Just trickle some water around the edge of the pot. Because I don't know whether, like me, you've noticed a lot of the new roots seem to be down the edge of the pot. Well, just trickle a bit down the edge of the pot so that those roots are okay. And don't soak the thing dramatically like you would in the growing season. So ease off a bit, don't pour so much in. If you don't pour so much in, obviously it'll dry quicker. You know, it's a bit of a guesstimate. You know, you just got to look at your media. I mean, that Latorre's got moss and small bark. That was totally dry. It's fine to give that a bit of a soak. And this one's still wet, so it won't get watered. So, you know, it varies. This time of year, not every pot gets watered when I look at it. Some of them do get left. And so that I don't annoy Rose, I'm trying to get round to doing my tags, because she kindly bought me some tags. So I've got the tags, I have no excuse. Last time I was filming the Dendrobiums, I got to this one and I couldn't for the life of me think what it was. It was a new acquisition and it just went out of my mind completely. So I've done the tag for it. And it's blenny annum. That's an unusual one. It's a late summer bloomer, late summer, early autumn. Now, that's unusual for a dendrobium. Comes from evergreen forests, so to all intents and purposes, it's going to get treated like Latorres and Phalaenopsis. Because of where it comes from, it's classed as warm growing, so it's probably not too happy out here at the moment, but it will be come the growing season. The canes are still growing. It's got good canes on it and they're still actively growing, so although it's a bit cool out here for it, it's not slowing it up, it's still pushing on. Good strong canes there, and as those are last year's growths and it sounds like it blooms late summer, early autumn, I see no right reason why it shouldn't bloom. And emphasis on evergreen forests. It's not a high light lover. It might get a little bit of sun through the cracks in the canopy now and again, but it wouldn't be classed as the same light requirements as the dendrobiums that come from deciduous forests, where they get the brightest light there is through their winter and early spring. So it's not one of those. So I'm treating that like the Latorre types, as a continuous grower, and we'll see how we get on. But yeah, it was what I call a box filler. I bought some plants that you know, when you can't hand pick them yourself and somebody offers to do that sort of thing, it's well worth doing. And the plants I had in mind, it was better to add a couple more in, and as I love the dendrobiums, I've got more of those than anything else. That was one I hadn't heard of, but when I saw the blooms I thought, yeah, we'll have that. Now that blooms in a strange style again. It has clusters of blooms, so you're looking at possibly 15 to 20 blooms in a cluster, and come out from what it says from older canes. These will be older canes by the end of the next growing season, and they are an intense yellow. And I'm a sucker for the yellows. And the centre of the lip, deep in the lip, is a purpley red, but then that colour fades and becomes stripes on the lip. So you've got quite an intense purpley red colour in the lip against a strong gold yellow. Now I think that's going to be quite a spectacle. Whether they're long lasting or not, we'll have to wait and see. But first job is to get some, then we can find out if they're long lasting. So that's that one. Now this is my only antelope type dendrobium in that class of dendrobiums. That's an area where I would like a couple more, because I find the blooms with the twisty petals actually interesting. You know, it's not just colours, sometimes it's shape as well. And I love the antelope type dendrobiums, and I've only got the one. It's a hybrid, and it's called black antelope. Wonder what colour that will be then. But this is an eBay purchase. So that's speciotic plants, Sousa. And to get an eBay plant of such quality, I will say is a rarity. But when you get one, you've got to savour it. I mean, I'm having to stand back to film this, because it is so vigorous at the moment. I think we've reached a terminal leaf on that cane. This one's not on the same plant. We won't talk about that one then. And I think this is probably going to be the final leaf. So that's as tall as those canes are going to get. But they are 2 feet tall. You know, it's a smashing plant. It's got lovely healthy leaves. It's pushed out a lot of roots since I got it. I haven't actually repotted that one, simply because it's in bark and the quality of the bark's okay. It's not crumbly, it's not breaking down, so I'm happy to leave that one as is until I see some more new growths coming. It hasn't had any new growth since I got it, because these are effectively, you know, the last year's growths still growing on now. So it may actually be out of season. But yeah, I think I may get a couple more antelope types. It's just a matter of choosing ones. My choice is simple nowadays. I must like the bloom, I must like the look of the plant, but the blooms need to be long lasting and if possible fragrant. Although that, for me, that's not a must. It's that the long lasting bit is quite important, especially on some of the dendrobiums. They only bloom once a year, quite a few of them. And if the blooms only last flipping 10 days, you know, that's a long time to wait for the next lot. They don't earn their keep. So I try and, you know, rationalise to get in ones that have very long lasting blooms. The longer the better. That's why I like the Latorre types. Those blooms last ages. So yeah, how long the blooms will last on the antelope one, I don't know. It's a hybrid, so you're not going to find that out anyway. But yeah, it's a good plant. Well, now that I've got this tatty dendrobium actually out, because it lives right up against the glass with quite a lot of plants in front of it, it's not easy to get at, so it only gets got at when I need to water it. And as it happens, I don't need to water this one, having got it out. It's still damp, so that one's going to wait. But we can at least have a look at the sheer number of buds on this now. If you look at this cane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's 8 buds on that cane. 3 or 4 on that one, 5 on that one, 3 or 4 on that one, 3 on that one. So yeah, it's blooming on the growths it put up last year. Now this is a truly deciduous one. So the number of new canes I got last year, they're already due in autumn. I've just taken 3 leaves off. So they're in the process of dropping the leaves on those, which means it should bloom on almost bare canes, which means you get to show off the blooms. Actually, they work quite nice, the deciduous dendrobiums, because you get to see the blooms without any distractions on the bare canes. But this plant will need a good tidy up, because obviously the previously bloomed canes now greatly outnumber the new canes. And I always class that as an out of balance plant. You know, it's still trying to store nutrients and energy in those older canes, which when, you know, when there aren't many of them and there's lots of new growth, that's fine. But when they greatly outnumber the latest growths, there's some energy that ought to be going into the new growth that isn't. So I tend to try and balance the plant out. So some canes will come off of that, but I'll wait until I see the new growths coming, you know, and then I'll decide which are the tattiest looking. I mean, if you take that one's shriveled, so's that one. They're of no use, yeah? So I can go round and look at the really weak, older, shriveled canes and just take them off. And older canes like this can stay for a bit, another year perhaps. So we'll sort that one out when the new growths start, which will probably be after it's bloomed. Lovely bright orange blooms on this one. And although it's a hybrid of some sort with no name, it's a unicum style dendrobium. The blooms are very like that. So I'm quite looking forward to that. That should have a lot of blooms on all at once. Good stuff. Okay, the weather's not playing ball now. It's gone dark basically, so I've lost my light. It's pointless trying to film like this. I'll get blurry bits and stuff, so I'll cut this one off here. I've still got quite a few unused clips, and if the weather brightens up I've still got some more things to film, but they can go in the next video basically. So hope you've enjoyed this. Well, it's a look at some of the dendrobiums that don't get looked at that often, plus a few other bits and pieces as I go along. That's a lot of my videos are in that style. It's just as I'm watering I pick a plant up and think, if you can hear me over the racket, that might be of interest to somebody. So that's a lot of my videos are that style. So I'll see you in the next one, which will be the clips I've already got stored up, plus any more that I can film if this weather decides to ease off a bit, shall we say. Sun was out half an hour ago. It's just like that at the moment, but a lot of the country got bad snow and ice and, you know, poor weather that just disrupts in this country. But you know, if you want to go out in that sort of weather, all you've got to do is put the waterproofs on, and at least, you know, you won't catch me out in it. Rain is for looking out the window at, not being in. That's my saying. See you next time.